Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be drawing Nemesis from Resident Evil 3. I kind of got a mashup of the Resident Evil 3 remake version as well as the original, which kind of has the tentacle here. I wanted to capture both versions because I happen to like both versions. Resident Evil Requiem comes out in like 18 days and I'm pretty pumped about it, so I've decided to draw the main stalkers of the series as frequently as I can until the game comes out, and then maybe I'll draw whatever ends up being the primary creature in that game. It looks like it's going to be the creature that sort of stalks Alicia Ashcroft, but you know, there might be some surprises up the game sleeves. So anyways, I'm going to do this in ink. I did, for the last video, Mr. X here. I'm using a watercolor paper. This is very smooth. It actually kind of makes drawing a little difficult because it just smears so easily. I've been into ink drawings lately. This is all done with parallel lines, and I don't know, I think it's a pretty cool effect. I think it looks really cool from the side and stuff when you can see sort of the directionality of it. I've been doing lots of ink stuff lately. Here's a Hellraiser inspired drawing of one of the Hell priests sitting on a bunch of skulls. This one's more graphic. This has not that much cross-hatching. There's more cross-hatching down here in the skulls. I did a Swamp Thing drawing on really large watercolor paper. This one took me a lot of time. I was figuring out a lot of stuff as I did this. Done this werewolf one, which I think is probably my overall best so far. And then I did a Ghost in the Shell sort of inspired drawing. And this one's, you know, it has a lot of areas where I could have improved, but I learned a lot. I kind of like the hair. I used this black zebra brush pen and did the hair that way, and I think it looked really good. Other than that, you know, there's a lot that I would probably change. But, so yeah, let's get into it. I'm probably going to switch to voiceover here as I will be able to better talk about Nemesis as I do that. And that's really what I want to do. I want to talk about some of his lore. I mean, him and Mr. X were in Raccoon City at pretty much the same time. And, you know, I think they're both really great stalkers, actually. Definitely the two high points. Mr. X probably in terms of actual gameplay, but Nemesis has such a iconic creature design. Alright, but let's get into it. Alright guys, this version of the video is going to be more of a overall drawing process. So right now I'm just going to go in and kind of pick out shadow shapes. I don't necessarily know what most people who are doing more ink-based art do, if they start with their blacks, but being a charcoal artist, I feel like, well, my first thing I did was charcoal art, I should say. I feel like it just kind of helps me see the shadow shapes, and I'm not going too crazy. I'm just gonna hit some of the areas that, you know, seem more obvious to me. I just want to keep everything here looking organic, as organic as possible. Lots of sinewy shapes. I'm going to keep the parallel line concept from the Mr. X drawing going. I'm making the light source over here, hence the shadow shape. So all the lines will be kind of going the opposite direction of that Mr. X drawing. I am also not certain if I'm going to do complete blacks for shadows. There'll be some little ones like that I just did if I do that, or right here, this little pocket. But I might make this a lot of just really tight hatching for the shadow shapes. I've just been super inspired by Bernie Wrightson and his work lately, especially the Frankenstein drawings. I mean, it's almost an amount of work that I can't even comprehend. And so whilst whilst I probably can't ever pull anything off quite like that, I would like to pay homage to that sort of effort in my work, at least. And I won't be able to go as hard as he did. Part of the Bernie Wrights and magic, or any magic that an artist has, is just some people just have it in them to really like lock in on an idea and just go for it. And I don't know, maybe someday I can get there. Right now there's so much stuff I want to draw that I almost invariably end up rushing through at a certain point because I just want to get to the next fun thing. And part of that might be the fact that I am not a master. So in my mind, I conceptualize it as I still have so much to learn before I devote, 200, 300 hours to a single thing. I can learn probably a lot more just from continuing to get repetitions in. Said I'm pretty torn here on how much true black I want to do. So I'm just going to do the universal direction here for now. I will make it pretty pure black right underneath the brow ridge, because that at the very least, it'll make it right on the eye too. It's this little eye right there. Same with this. This is the little eye. I'll outline that so you guys can see it. And I'm going to have to add quite a bit of contrast around that. I'm going to leave it white. So this area around the eye, which I've created a bunch of little bumpy pockets, I'm going to have to probably get some pretty tight hatching in there to really make that pretty gray. I will add this core shadow line through here, which will be the radius upon which my lines come off to describe the nose and its shadows. I'm using a 0.5 micron right now, in case that's any benefit knowledge-wise to anybody watching. It's a pretty thick line. It kind of has some good energy to it. When I first heard artists talk about each of the pens and pencils and the lines and the energy they give, I didn't understand it at first, but I gotta say, something like this gives so much more emotion than a micron. And it makes me think about, like, should I get a quill or something like that to really focus on lines that have a little more pizzazz to them. The nice part about a micron, of course, is that you can just pick it up and go. I'm deciding that I will just black out these. They're too tight to really parallel line, so if you want to learn ink drawing from people far better than me, you know, Jim Lee has a YouTube channel that is very good, and there's lots of artists who have really good art that do ink work. Like I said, I have done, this is what, my 5th ink drawing. I'm always staggered at how much more time these take than my charcoal drawings did. Charcoal drawings I could get done in I don't think I traditionally spent more than about 8 hours on any given one. And so though my light source is up here, and I do want to have the parallel lines, it can be visually interesting to switch it up every now and again. And so I'm always looking for areas to do that. And, I don't know if I'm successful when I do it or not. But I'm going to, instead of following that same line here for this shadow shape, I want to imply a little bit more form because it's kind of wrapping towards the outside. So I'm just going to make that angle a little more shallow. And hopefully it just makes it a little interesting. So I'm going to go back through, and at the part where the shadow is I'm going to make the starts and ends a little darker to give it that wrapping form, like the cylinder shading. I might hatch these in, like all this over here, just with less tight line work to make it sure it's still in shadow, but not drawing as much attention as the light side of the face. But honestly, I probably won't do that on camera. That'll probably be something I lean in really close for and do. Nemesis is such a cool character, and he's been on my list to draw ever since I was kind of starting to learn drawing. I mean, he terrified me as a kid. I think Resident Evil, I guess there's a difference between when it came out and when I had exposure to it, I'm sure. But I was probably like 9 years old when I was starting to be exposed to Nemesis. And I was terrified. My friend who I went to school with, who I just thought was like the coolest person, he had it. And our parents were friends. And I had heard that he could not sleep because Resident Evil Nemesis had scared him so badly. And so when a person you think is like that much cooler than you has had their world rocked by it, it made me not want to play it. It's like there's absolutely no way I can do that. Alright, so that was kind of a pass there. Oh, I need to do this part of the nose. I didn't see that. Make that pretty tight through there. Enhance the shadow shape here to pull it back out. Same with that. Just trying to use line weight too. Yeah, so once I get an area inked, sometimes I go back and erase really quickly to get that pencil out of there and see how it's sort of looking for me. And you know, it'll usually lighten it up quite a bit. But I'll just leave that for now. I'll keep working. So I'm just going to black out this right here above the eye. Give it that. I'm going to do this whole shape here actually. So sometimes, since I have a hard time with, I guess maybe it's not even a hard time, it's just what I'm used to. When I'm coming up with sinewy shapes and stuff, what I'll do, at least a trick I'll do, is I'll like go over this area and lightly shade it. You know, blend it with my finger. And then I'll think about the light source, and now it hit this circular form, and I'll go through and kind of randomly erase. And when you get really up close, you would see interesting textures that are left behind. So right now I'm modifying that shape there to pick up on where the graphite got left behind at. And sometimes it can really help me as I search for believable shapes that maybe, because you can fall into a habit, it really feels like, with just plain penciling and not shading, of just drawing the same shapes over and over again. Shapes that you're comfortable with. So I did a lot of that on this piece to hopefully try and get some different forms, just to keep it random. And even as I draw here, I'm trying to be pretty loose with my line and just let it wiggle along. I don't want it to be too rigid. Because a lot of time when you're blasting in basic shapes, you will just like, I just drew this on there, like basically a square. I'm always sort of terrified when I'm doing ink, and maybe it'll dissipate with time. But, you know, you can put all this effort into a drawing and you could kind of mess up in a big bad way. And of course there are things to help with that, naturally. You know, whiteouts and correction fluids and things like that, but it doesn't look quite as good. Of course, by the time you probably take a picture or print it in and scan it to a computer and touch up, it wouldn't look that bad because it's just going to register it as white value. But the original art can kind of suffer a bit. Let's see. I kind of did her chest wrong on her suit, and so I went back in with whiteout, and it's a different color than the paper because this is Arch's watercolor paper, and it is not pure white. It doesn't have any of the kind of fake additives in it to get pure white, which end up yellowing over time. So that's more of an archival paper, and this, I presume, would yellow. Who knows when exactly, if it's even important for our lifetimes, but that's the idea, is that and so anyways, whiteout doesn't work. It works pretty good with this, but it is noticeably alive on the watercolor paper. That's that nice watercolor paper, which is Arch's. This is a nice paper too. I do like it. It's pretty affordable, and it's also smaller, so it allows me to kind of hopefully move through some pieces more quickly than that big 12 by 17 paper does. So this is another area where I kind of pulled concepts from the Resident Evil 3 Nemesis remake version and the original. In the remake, he kind of has his staples and a gash across his head. And in the original, it bisects his head, basically. And so I started with the gash of the remake, and I wanted to carry it more like across his head. And so that's at least the intent right there. It's always funny when you're like learning charcoal drawing, they're like, you shouldn't rotate the page, you don't have to rotate the page. And then in ink drawing, you should definitely rotate the page because your arm has angles upon which it works best. And you need to follow those. Can't decide if I should black this whole area in or cross hatch it. You know, I'm so torn with the concepts I want to work with and you know, the reality of the situation. I'm adding a little line weight here at the area of the core shadow. Trying to hit right on the lines that I had thrown down. continue to be sick. This cold is kind of a lingering beast. Just black all that in right there. I feel like this needs a lot more pure dark in it right through here. Need to connect the brow ridge and have a more strong shadow form. So I'm just going to do that. Yeah, I'm just going to get rid of this. It's not helping anything. I'm going to throw down lines over this form here. I just get the feeling that all this would look so much better steeped in pure black as opposed to the tight line work. But I don't have to do that for a long time. Just going to keep messing about up here, avoiding that confrontation. I'm using that directionality here to give some form to these brow shapes, because really they should be moving up and around, and they should kind of be in shadow, even though they're the first form next to the actual shadow. Your brow still, it doesn't really catch light until like up here, so this part should still be kind of be showing that it's trying to hit some light. Like I said, this whole eye area is going to be, this will all be cross-hatched through there, probably pretty tightly. I mean, I think a big, strong, confident black shape I can do is just the mouth opening here. I've progressed quite a bit. It's really the same process, just trying to anchor down some dark shapes that are nice, and then, I'm using the egg approach. So with the light source over here, it should get darker, especially as it goes down. So that's all I'm doing. It's just a bunch of single line direction hatching. And, through here I try and, there's little gaps and stuff that probably kind of hard to see, but it kind of just creates some circular forms. So, I'm kind of, other than this one cavity up here, which ended up with some hatching that I like the look of, deep cavities, I'm kind of going solid black. Areas where, it wouldn't necessarily be full black up in here, but I can't see a whole lot of purpose to trying to tightly hatch that. And yeah, I think a good rule for this one is that if it's a cavity, that can be steeped in complete black. And once I started wrapping my head around that concept, I think things started to improve for me here. Because for a while I had hatched all this in, and it just wasn't, it just wasn't working quite the way I want. And nothing in nature is truly black unless you're like in a cave. I mean, I'm sure there's some situations where a shadow is actually black, but for the most part, stuff isn't entirely black. And so that's why I had an aversion to it. But I think sometimes artistically we need to do things that, we need to make choices about what we're going to do. And that's one of those choices. Black is always a choice. And having attractive shadow shapes is one of the main choices. So here's a cavity. And I'm hesitant to go with my black idea for that, because again, the cross hatching the hatching looks kind of nice. So I'm just going to darken up some areas around it to add a little drama. Up my line weights through here with this brush pen. I really like this tool. This up here was done with the brush pen. It's just another thing to have in the arsenal that makes attractive looking marks. This was the brush pen, and so there's a little. The way I have come to the idea of what I need to do here is I need to have some really dark shapes over here to sort of anchor the face. And so I'm kind of, I pivot a little bit and change the direction of these kind of tumor-like growths so that I could have really dark shapes over here. Which again is something artistically we get to do. We get to bend stuff to a will, because not that this is something from real life, but our goal is always to enhance real life. If you're just, maybe copying a photograph, you're missing out possibly on an opportunity to enhance the image. Try and go really fine here. Just trying to keep it loose through here. And I'll go back in with an actual pen and add that finer detail that we're after for a lot of this stuff. Man, I cannot wait for this cold to go away. It's a little challenging drawing when every time you lean over, you kind of get congested and whatnot. I'm gonna have to come up with something pretty good for this area too, behind the cheek. Let's see. Give that a stronger shadow through there, same through there. I do want the cheek to kind of be the lightest part, cheek and eye there. And over here I'll do some nice hatch work. Hopefully. I say that like I can actually do it, but I struggle. And over here I'll do some nice hatch work. Hopefully. I say that like I can actually do it, but I struggle. And then over here, I have some light pencil here that you just can't see, but that's gonna help define my cylinder form for this. And then this tongue, I want to make the tongue pretty gnarly. So it's gonna end up having to be a lot of detail. Might as well just blast it in. When in doubt, just go for it. Well, I'll do it to about there, because that's where I run out of my assuredness on the way it looks. So this shape was one that I had done my pencil trick that I talked about earlier with you guys, where I just shade in the whole thing and then erase. So that's how I achieved these. It's the same method I did when I do charcoal drawings, of just kind of like filling in an area and seeing what happens. The kneaded eraser is a really good tool for that, because it'll just randomly lift parts of it. And sometimes you have little happy accidents like this, like there's a little pencil left over there. And so I'm just going to keep that shape that happened there. And now I'll be forced to come up with something, but this will be all in shadow. I should just do that. And try and do these as tight as possible. I'm going onto my mouth there a little bit, but what can you do? I can just use this Posca pen. I can always go back in. This is a better, more reliable whiteout tool, because I kind of left it gray, so it's not what I want. These lower teeth I've been kind of avoiding. In theory, the tongue should be casting a shadow, and there just really shouldn't be a whole lot of light hitting them, but they are teeth, so I'm just kind of trying to decide on a value range for them. I'll probably just pretty tightly crosshatch, not just so dissimilar from these, and just let it go and maybe have like a little bit of white on this tooth. I don't know yet. Like I said, I'll use a pencil and let's do it now. I'll show you what I do. So I'm doing the hatching about as tight as I can once again. Just see how it looks. And then again, just like the method I use for some of these things, I can just go in and erase like a little bit there off the tops, maybe down the edge of the tooth where it might catch a little bit of light. See, I have this eraser at a fairly sharp angle here, so I can do that. So I might just do something like that. It's not obviously the same, but it's a gray tone and it gives me an idea. And then I would just follow these lines. And there's these white spots that got left where I missed. And I honestly just try and keep those. Like this is one of those right here. All these are just little spaces I missed, and I kind of consider it part of the character. Like this is one I chose to enhance right here as a white spot, and I just gave it a little bit of line value. Same with right here. Those two, just for a little relief. I like just going with things that happen in the course of a drawing, things that wouldn't happen the same way again, and I think those create really interesting opportunities. Alright, so I'm going to erase all this over here. I'm going to keep trying to darken the line weight out here towards the edge, further away from the light source. Like this one would look good if it was a little deeper. And so this side over here needs to be gray. It's obviously a very tight hatch. And again, each level that goes out, well, in theory you could leave the outside one with a little bit of a rim light for stylistic effect, but this should be the brightest one, and then that should get darker. Same with these. So I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to try and come up with a spacing that makes sense. I'm going to break the line here so that the middle stays lit like a cylinder. All right, so we did it. Like I said, my goal was to leave this one a little bit brighter. And I'll just drive up the shadow there too. Drive it up here. Yeah, hopefully that sort of reads. Like I said, this area is going to be really tough up here because in theory the light is kind of hitting it, but I want it to be a lot more detailed than it is. This area down here too on this side is going to be pretty tough to render. I said I'm going to do the same concept as this side of just beefing up the line weight as we get further away from the light. And then this is going to need like a bunch of little random shapes in it. Just for a beat up flash. Alright guys, I'm going to take another break though. When I come back, I assume I'll have this cylinder shaded in, because I just need to help me frame the face. And so if I can get that cylinder shaded in, should start, yeah, holding onto the face there. Alright, I'll catch you guys in a bit. Alright guys, so we're back with more Nemesis here. I've kind of just avoided things that I'm not sure about for now, like the white part of his face up here, and I hatched in all these dark shapes, which are kind of going to make up the void or tight masses in his chest and whatnot. I'll do this one too. This one's split by, so here's a big void, but it's split by his kind of armored suit, which in the lore he wears these suits to kind of keep his mutations at bay. And I guess that was one of the bigger problems I actually had with the Resident Evil 3 remake. I'm using a 0.01. I started with 5 there, but that just is, I think, too small for the area. But one of the problems I had with the Resident Evil 3 remake in terms of design concept was that his inhibitor suit is kind of roughly just a, I mean, it looks like garbage bags, really. I thought that his suit in the original game made more sense as something that would limit the mutations of his body when he takes damage. So I've just been doing that, and then I go back through and add a stronger line edge to the edge of the form, just to help imply a cavity. I said, I had a somewhat of a vague rule that if it was a cavity, I would just fill it in all black. But I don't know, there's something about the way these end up looking when you hatch them that I think just looks really cool. And, you know, keeping one area full black, I mean, it kind of helps just center your gaze on his face. I did do full black down here, as I figured by the time the light is reaching underneath his jaw, you're not going to see all that much. Kind of hatching in some chin shapes here. Thickening up the line weight at the top where the form first starts to create shadow. And to be honest, I kind of want to hatch the whole thing down here. But we'll see, I'll leave it for now. Again, I'm kind of being afraid of decisions that involve areas where I'll be leaving it white. So I'll do this. I need this to be a good density here because I need it to kind of hold our gaze inside his face. So I have this, it's like a really aggressive version of a sternocleidomastoid muscle. And I'm just doing this hatching as tight as I physically can there. Trying to go back over lines at the start and add a thicker line weight, as I think it just looks visually interesting to kind of get that look going. Yeah, in ink I'm always so intimidated to make moves. But I guess I'll start going a little bit here on this tube. I think I kind of made a mistake there by connecting this line. I think I should have left this open, which I'll just white out that. This paper, like I said, is good for the whiteout. It has the same sort of brightness, really. So I'll just let that dry, and I'll carry a little squiggly form down into there. Alright, I'm going to bounce to the tongue now. Tongue needs to be strong. And it's not something I would bring up to a lot of people, but because I just don't know that most people would see it. But I think I made the tongue too thick, or basically wide right here. I think it should have come a little shallower. There's not a whole lot I can do about that. Again, I could probably white out it, and I might do that. Right now I'll shade it as if I'm going to make that correction. But a lot of times when I start rendering forms that I'm having a tough time seeing, I'm able to see it better for what it is and see if something works. I have a hard time sometimes just figuring out shapes if I don't get to render them at all. And that's been one of the harder parts at switching to ink. Is in drawing I could just sort of correct it when it happened, and whilst you can correct in ink, it's obviously a little more challenging. It's kind of like watercolor in that the correction becomes kind of challenging. Again, I'm still holding to the idea of it. I would at least like lines to move up towards here. So that's sort of the goal. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it here. I think I have to almost do the opposite direction. Or maybe I guess maybe I could keep the line direction going that way. It's a little counterintuitive. The tongue is going to be largely unrendered. A kind of white mass. So I wanted to create a lot of sort of stronger white shapes on it and dark shapes to give it form and imply form. So things wrapping down and around just sort of hopefully helps create that form that you wouldn't get from, since I'm not necessarily going to render it fully. I'm not decided yet what I'm going to do for the background. I could do a bunch of universal line directions. I was thinking about kind of making this area gray with some tight hatching, and then sort of just a black, halo on the outside of it. But it'd be a lot of work to render this really tightly. Rendering it in a way that is not so dissimilar from these. I think it'd probably look pretty cool, but yeah, just a lot of work. Which, honestly, that's sometimes what it takes, so. I like to tell myself I'm not going to be a person, not that there's anything wrong with it, who shies away from doing the work required when it comes to art. I feel a little more patience now where I'm at in my art process. It used to be I just felt like I had to get stuff done so fast. Like, if I didn't get a drawing done in 2 sittings, then it was really starting to stress me out. And now, because I just felt like I had so much to learn, and like if I spent too much time on something, And now I feel a little calmer, like I have time. This process right here is learning. With pen, every decision you make has to be sort of conscious and thought out. And so it's a different type of learning. One was getting lots of reps in, and this is like getting really good reps in. This can be a pretty large area to tightly hatch here. And so for large areas, I start just moving slower. I'll just deliberately start my line and go right to where I want to. And I don't really care if it is perfect, because that's not really the goal here of this. It's, in my mind, it's to, be human. It's not to rule it all out and do everything with a little straight edge or because oftentimes the most interesting parts for me in stuff like this are the little mistakes. It's what my eye gets drawn to in a good way. Like, yeah, when I think about doing like this much of the background back here, like that, it becomes an intimidating prospect. But I think it ends up looking pretty dang cool. I'll do that thing where I go back in and darken up the starts. Through here could use a little bit more. Like I said, I think the coolest part of that area I did is where I messed up, like these larger white spaces here that just add a cool texture. I think that looks kind of cool. The lines going that direction, and erase that. I did a little gray tone there. I'm going to carry it up to here. So I'm going to add a little line density to the middle of this shadow here. Just because that's sort of how the shadow shape would work. I'm just trying to overlap existing lines. Hopefully that reads. It's probably not the best. I could probably really connect those and get more interesting shapes, kind of like, I think that's working. And I like leaving like that big pass-through line there. I just think for whatever reason it looks attractive to me. Might not be for the viewer or you guys, but I like leaving those signs that a human did it. Trying to add random shapes. Let's see. This would come down. I really don't know what to do with this shape here. If I should just leave it white or kind of go for a tight cylinder hatching where maybe there's just a white highlight down it. Yeah, I don't know. It means I'm going to avoid that decision for a while. Alright guys, welcome back. I think when I last left off I was sort of rendering the tongue. Done that, and plus made it a good bit further here. So I just got to kind of fill in. I'm going to fill in the rest of this with this pretty close dark hatching. I'm using a 5 for it. I want it to look leathery. I'm not so concerned about it exactly reading as leather 100%. What's more important for me is that we have this sort of pretty dark mass down here to balance out the white that is this area. That's sort of the goal I'm going with for now. I've been using this zebra double-sided pen, and it's really good. It adds so much life to the drawing. I went back up through here and brushed in these shapes that kind of, I'm trying to use them at places that show a form change or a plane change, from the top of the head to more the vertical plane. Same with the tubes here. And I just think it has a lot more life than microns give it. But I guess I'll just show you what my overall strategy is here, which is just slow, steady, and as tight as I can be. Not too worried about if the line wobbles a little. Again, this is a hand doing it, and that's part of the look. I'm applying good pressure so that it comes out as black and not like a gray streak, which, your pressure sort of helps dictate that. Of course, line density and whatnot helps that too. Tighter, faster lines will usually make it look more gray. I need to go back and intersect a couple of these because a little too much white. And overall, that's the value I'm kind of looking for down here. I don't know if it'll work out, but in my mind, that's what I want to be doing. And I'm going kind of intentionally up to the edge of this thing because I'm going to turn the form just a little bit from there. And I think it'll look kind of cool, that area of mesh or overlap. Oh yeah, this is kind of the process, just deliberate, slow. It's not going to be super exciting to watch, so I won't spend too much of your time here. This will turn into a time lapse. But I wanted to talk about, which I know I've talked about before in a Resident Evil video, maybe the liquor. I did a video on the liquor, which really is where I did this tongue thing from, because I don't believe Nemesis really has a tongue that he uses. He has tentacles that come out of his body, his hands, etc. I did this as a tentacle, which is sort of in the original. But it's hard not to look at Resident Evil and the stalkers in general, particularly Nemesis and Mr. X, and think that they weren't, in some way inspired by Clive Barker and his Hellraiser creations. All the leather and just sort of detailed, mangled flesh, which of course is kind of the iconic look of the Cenobites. And, that came out in the 80s. So, whether it's a direct inspiration or more just like that's where art was heading at the time, I can't be sure. I was born in 89, and so my knowledge of the zeitgeist at the time is low in terms of living it. But yeah, it's hard not to look at that stuff and think, oh, that's pretty Hellraiser inspired. Having a hard time down here at the bottom of the page with my lines. Trying to start a line at the edge of the paper, and it sort of wavered a bit. But now my lines are going to kind of go more, turn a little more with the form. All in all, trying to keep with the general direction of light. Of course, this I did opposite, which was just to add a bit of visual interest. Same with this whole area over here in his neck region. It's actually hatched this way because as much as I like the uniform line, I think it's interesting to play with changing that direction up every now and again, as well as helpful for the eye to have areas to relax. And this is all just my theorizing upon studying other artists and maybe just guessing at their choices. But the face and the tongue are the focus here, and giving this separate line direction right at the edge of the focal point, I think almost my hope is that it'll keep the eye sort of there. It'll push the eye back from following the lines down. Whether or not that works, I don't know. I think the image is looking pretty good. I think this area here I'm going to gray out, and maybe it'll be a more interesting shape. I was thinking of doing something more like this, that direction, to again draw the eye. And then you could you do these hatches, like do that way, and then you can have kind of a conflicting thing going on there. And maybe this one would be more like this way. And then just start steeping it all in black over here. Like this is just pure black. And then I think maybe even pure black up to here. Maybe well, it's white here. So I think having it be pure black through here would be strong. The idea generally with portraits is the light side has dark background and the darker side has a lighter background. So I might do something like that. I'm not entirely crazy about this direction. Maybe more like a, let me find my eraser here. Maybe more like this direction, like I don't know. I'm going to play with that. I think it's going to be a multi-pronged approach to how I sort of do that, and then pitch it in black. And maybe it won't be pure black. Maybe it'll be like spikes that come out, more graphic shapes with little areas of white left. Leaving these white shapes that are kind of triangular and menacing. That's the idea. We'll see if I'm brave enough to do it. Let's see, where'd my pen go? So yeah, I love the Hellraiser designs, and of course, I really love the Nemesis design. I think if it's paying homage to a Hellraiser design, then I think it does a really good job with just how mangled the flesh is, and I don't know, just how gruesome it is. Alright. I have to decide how long. I don't know if I'm going to carry the line all the way up. It's a pretty long line. See how it feels. I think I can do it. My chair, it's a nice chair. It's by Autonomous. The armrests slide in and out, so I'm going to move it to the maximum out so that my elbow has a little support. What I will do when all is said and done, I will go back and pick areas that I want to build up some of the line weight to sort of add, a little bit of that leathery sheen, also to help it form. Like right here, it's turning, and so it would kind of make sense for this to be a little darker right through here, just to move the form around. Oh, that was a long one. Unfortunately, these poles are just going to keep getting longer and longer. And I'm kind of not staying as tight as I would like to on some of these. You know, like I kind of have a larger gap there, but I'll just roll with it. I do think it'll look cool. I'm interested to see how the overlap here works. They said my primary focus isn't necessarily in material accuracy, it's in value accuracy. And not even necessarily value accuracy for the leather, but just value to help with the piece in general. I do need to get better at rendering subtle textures in drapery in pen and ink. In charcoal, you know, it wasn't so bad because you can create these really fine gradual gradations. So I'm going to try through here to create a wrinkle. And I don't want to create a boundary line there per se. So what I'm going to do is change up my line direction for a little bit of a visual interest to show a fold taking place. Yeah, like I said, I don't know if that looks like doesn't really look like a fabric fold or a shiny part of leather. Alright, so now we're coming upon the overlap. So what I'm doing here is kind of just trying to grab the area where the line ended and carry it. And what it will do is it'll create kind of an interesting mesh point there, but it's not so bad because it's kind of sort of underneath this buckle here. Alright guys, thanks for watching. That's going to pretty much do it here for Nemesis. At this point in the video, I'm just going back over areas where I thought the ink wasn't as dark as I wanted. This Pentel brush pen has really nice dark ink, so I just kind of will sometimes take it and go back over areas, particularly where I want some high contrasts. So I did it around the whole edge of the head and whatnot. But thanks for watching along if you made it this far. It's a long video. This drawing probably, I don't know, it'd take 12 hours or so. But I had a lot of fun with it. I learned a lot. I'm happy I went with the background style I did. It was a lot of work, but I think it came out well. And next up is Lady D, so hope you guys will tune in for that one. Thanks for watching. Peace.